We're optimizing for the future, Robert. That future requires a different kind of leadership. Amelia Croft said the words with the practiced dispassion of someone who had rehearsed them in front of a mirror. Her voice was crisp, her posture perfect. She sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the main conference room, the one with the view of the city skyline, the one I built. They thought firing me would be the end of the story. They were wrong. My name is Robert Hensley. I'm 51 years old. And until that moment, at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I was the vice president of manufacturing for Precision Dynamics, a company I had poured my life into for the last 18 years. I owned 34% of it. I sat on its board. Or, more accurately, I was its board. Amelia gestured vaguely with a hand adorned with a delicate Cartier bracelet. As part of our strategic realignment, we are eliminating legacy positions to create synergy and empower a more agile operational paradigm. Synergy, paradigm, legacy. The buzzwords hung in the air like cheap air freshener, failing to mask the stench of betrayal. Around the table, the other VPs, marketing, sales, finance, suddenly found the grain of the mahogany intensely interesting. None of them met my eye. They were all new, hired within the last 5 years, all with impressive resumes and zero institutional memory. I looked directly at Amelia. She was 29 years old, with a Wharton MBA in her father's eyes, but she had none of his grit, none of his understanding of what it took to turn an idea, scrawled on a napkin, into a $50 million a year enterprise. She had inherited his controlling shares 6 months ago after he passed, and with them, a sense of divine right. "So I'm fired," I said. My voice was steady, even. I learned control in the Army, and later on, factory floors where a moment of panic could cost someone a limb. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. I wasn't playing my part. I was supposed to be flustered, angry, maybe even plead. "Your role is redundant, Robert," she corrected, her tone sharp. "We've retained a consulting firm, Bainbridge, to overhaul our logistics. Your expertise, while valuable in the startup phase, isn't scalable for our next chapter of growth." The startup phase. She said it as if it were a distant, slightly embarrassing memory. That startup phase was 18 years of 80-hour weeks. It was me putting my entire severance from my last job, every penny, into this company when her father, Arthur, was 3 weeks from bankruptcy. It was me sleeping on a cot in the corner of our first leased warehouse because we couldn't afford a night watchman. It was me designing the proprietary plating process that became our flagship patent and put us on the map. "I see," I said. The calm in my own voice was unsettling, even to me. It was the calm that comes after the storm has passed, and you're just left looking at the wreckage. A dead calm settled over me, and in that quiet, something clicked. She had no idea. She'd looked at the cap table and seen her 51% inheritance. She'd looked at the org chart and seen my title. She'd never bothered to look at the founding documents. She had no idea that her triumph was a fiction, a stage play where she was the only one who didn't know the scenery was about to collapse. What Amelia Croft, with her designer suit and her talk of paradigms, didn't know was that her father's signature on a dusty piece of paper from 2006 was about to end her career before it had even begun. If you appreciate stories about competence triumphing over arrogance, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens when people forget who built the foundation of the house they're living in. The breaking point came in 2006. Back then, I was 33, and Precision Dynamics was just me, Arthur Croft, and a handful of machinists in a rented space that smelled of motor oil and desperation. I had met Arthur 2 years prior. I'd just been laid off from a senior manager position at a major aerospace manufacturer, a victim of a corporate merger. I walked away with a severance package of $92,000 and a profound distrust of corporate bureaucracy. Arthur was a brilliant engineer, a true visionary, but he was a terrible businessman. He had a revolutionary idea for a new type of high-tolerance metal component for medical devices, but he was burning through cash with no clear path to production. I saw him pitch at a local investors meeting. He was passionate, but the money guys saw the risk. They saw a tinkerer, not an industrialist. I saw potential. I saw a diamond that just needed cutting. I approached him afterward at a dingy coffee shop. I laid my severance check on the table between us. "This is everything I have," I told him. "I'll run your operations. I'll build your production line. I'll handle the supply chain, the quality control, the hiring. You just focus on inventing." In exchange, I didn't want a big salary. I wanted a piece of the company, a real piece. We settled on 34% equity. It was an aggressive ask, but Arthur knew he was at the end of his rope. He agreed. Those first few years were brutal. My wife, Sarah, was a saint. She went from being married to a well-paid corporate manager to being married to a guy who came home covered in grease at 2 a.m., if he came home at all. We had 2 young kids, a boy and a girl. I missed t-ball games. I missed dance recitals. I missed birthdays. I poured everything into that company because I believed in Arthur's vision, and I knew, with my operational discipline, I could make it a reality. I built the entire manufacturing process from scratch. I sourced used machinery from bankrupt factories in the Rust Belt and rebuilt it myself. I wrote the first quality control manual, a document that grew to 400 pages and became the company's Bible. When we couldn't afford a proper ERP system, I taught myself to code and built a rudimentary one to track inventory and orders. That system, patched and upgraded over the years, still ran our entire operation. It was clunky. It was ugly, but it was rock solid. And I was the only person on earth who understood its every quirk. My value wasn't in a title. It was in the institutional knowledge locked in my head. I knew that our primary aluminum supplier gave a 3% discount if you paid on the 28th of the month, but only if you called Dale in accounting directly, never his assistant. I knew the specific vibration frequency on CNC mill number 3 meant a bearing was about to fail in the next 72 hours. I knew our biggest client, a medical device giant in Germany, was run by a stern executive named Klaus, who secretly loved photos of classic American muscle cars, and sending him a picture of my restored 1969 Mustang every Christmas was the only reason we kept that $16.8 million contract when competitors came sniffing. Amelia saw none of that. She had grown up in a world of privilege her father's work afforded her. Summers in the south of France, a top-tier boarding school, then Wharton. She'd visit the factory occasionally as a teenager, walking through in pristine white sneakers, looking at the workers with a kind of detached curiosity, like a tourist at a zoo. To her, the company was an asset, a number on a balance sheet. To me, it was the sum of a million small sacrifices. Her father, Arthur, started to get sick about 3 years ago. A slow, creeping neurological disease that stole his focus and his energy. Amelia, fresh out of business school, began to insert herself into the company. She started as a strategic consultant, then became director of business development. She spoke in a language I didn't understand, full of KPIs, deliverables, and blue sky thinking. She never once asked me how the production line actually worked. She saw me as a relic, a necessary part of the old story, but a hindrance to the new one she wanted to write. I was the grizzled factory boss, the guy with calloused hands and a worn-out leather jacket. I wasn't executive material for the sleek, tech-focused company she envisioned. The origin of my secret weapon came on a rainy night in November 2006. We had just landed our first major contract, a 5-year deal that guaranteed our survival. We were celebrating in Arthur's tiny, cluttered office with a bottle of cheap whiskey. He was giddy with relief and gratitude. "We did it, Robert," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it. I couldn't have done this without you." He grew quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the rain lashing against the glass. "I've been thinking," he said. "We're going to need more capital to grow. We'll have to bring in outside investors eventually. And those guys, they're sharks. They'll see an old inventor like me and a factory guy like you, and they'll try to push us out, install one of their own suits." He reached into his desk and pulled out a document bound in a blue legal cover. "My lawyer drafted this. It's our official partnership agreement. It formalizes your equity, your board seat, everything, but it has something special in it." He flipped to a page near the back and pointed to a paragraph. "Section 4, Clause B. Read this." The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. It stipulated that any change to the executive leadership, specifically the CEO or VP of manufacturing, or any change to the composition of the founding board, required a unanimous vote of that founding board. "What does this mean exactly?" I asked. Arthur smiled, a rare, genuine grin. "The founding board consists of 2 members, you and me. But here's the clever part my lawyer came up with. In any vote concerning the succession of a board member, that member must recuse themselves. So if we were voting to replace me as CEO, I couldn't vote. That leaves a board of 1. He tapped my chest with his finger. "You, Robert. For that specific vote, you are the board. It means no one can ever force me out of my own company." "And no one can force me out either," I realized aloud. "Exactly," he said. "It protects us. It protects the soul of this place." We signed it right there, with his secretary as a witness. We got it notarized the next day. I put my copy in a fireproof safe at home and, for the most part, forgot about it. It was a shield, tucked away for a battle I never thought would come. Arthur created it to protect himself from faceless investors. He never imagined the person it would one day protect me from would be his own daughter. Losing my job was more than just an insult. It was an existential threat. My wife and I had planned our entire retirement around the value of my 34% stake. Our house was paid off, but our 2 kids were in expensive universities. Our liquid savings were modest. We had always reinvested dividends back into the company to fuel its growth. Being fired meant not just losing my salary of $225,000 a year, but potentially being forced to sell my shares at a valuation determined by a hostile CEO. Amelia could bleed the company dry with consulting fees and strategic initiatives, cratering its value before I could cash out. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice Sarah and I had made, was on the line. After Amelia's grand pronouncement, security was supposed to escort me out. 2 men in ill-fitting suits stood awkwardly by the door. I looked at Amelia. "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll be working out my standard 2 weeks' notice to ensure a smooth transition." She was taken aback. She expected a scene, a fight. She didn't expect calm compliance. "That's not how this works, Robert. Your access will be terminated effective immediately." "Check with HR," I said simply. "My employment contract, which you also probably haven't read, stipulates a 2-week transition period initiated by me or the company. I'm initiating it. I'll be at my desk." Before she could respond, I stood up and walked out of the conference room. The security guards looked at her, confused. I walked past them, my back straight, and went back to my office. The office, with the scuffed furniture and the window overlooking the factory floor, I knew like the back of my hand. I didn't pack my things. I sat down at my desk, pulled out my personal phone, and called my lawyer, a man named David Chen. David was a quiet, unassuming man who specialized in corporate law. He was methodical, precise, and had the demeanor of a patient librarian. "David, it's Robert Hensley. It happened." "I see," he said. There was no surprise in his voice. "Did she cite cause?" "Restructuring. Redundancy. Paradigm shifts," I said, the words tasting like ash. "As we expected. Go home, Robert. Get the document. The original. Bring it to my office at 2 p.m. Do not talk to anyone else from the company. I left the building, walking through the factory one last time. The hum of the machines was a familiar symphony. The smell of coolant and hot metal was more comforting to me than any corner office. The guys on the floor, men I'd hired and trained myself, saw me and nodded. They knew something was wrong. I just gave them a small, tight smile. At home, I went to the large, fireproof safe in my basement workshop. Behind old tax returns and my father's service medals was a faded blue legal folder. The Partnership Agreement of Precision Dynamics, LLC. Dated November 15th, 2006. My signature was firm and clear. Arthur's was a hopeful scrawl. Meanwhile, Amelia was moving fast. At 11 a.m., a company-wide email landed. It announced my retirement, effective immediately, after many years of dedicated service. It went on to praise my contributions to the company's foundational era and wished me well in my future endeavors. It was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism, painting me as a beloved relic being put out to pasture. The email then pivoted to her grand vision, announcing a new Chief Strategy Officer, a 28-year-old named Julian, who came directly from Bainbridge, the consulting firm. His picture showed a smiling young man with perfect teeth and a background in disruptive market entry. Her arrogance was breathtaking. She didn't just fire me. She tried to erase me, to reframe my 18 years of labor as a quaint prologue to her main story. She assumed I would just take my gold watch and fade away. She never once considered that the old factory boss might have a deep and abiding respect for the fine print. She made the classic mistake of the privileged. She assumed the rules that governed others did not apply to her. At 2:00 p.m., I sat in David Chen's office. He read the original agreement under a bright desk lamp, his finger tracing each line of Section 4, Clause B. He read it 3 times. Finally, he looked up at me over his glasses. It's ironclad, Robert. The language is unambiguous. Her appointment as CEO was never ratified by the founding board. Legally, she does not hold that office. Every directive she has given since taking the title is void. So, what's our next move? I asked. Patience, he said. We let her make a few more mistakes. You work your 2 weeks. You do your job, and only your job. Let's see how her new paradigm handles reality. For the next 9 working days, I followed David's advice. I showed up at 8:00 a.m. and left at 5:00 p.m. on the dot. I performed only the duties explicitly listed in my official job description, a document that hadn't been updated since 2010. The invisible work, the 100 little things I did every day that kept the company running smoothly, stopped. On Wednesday, a call came in at 7 p.m. from the night shift supervisor. A hydraulic press was throwing a pressure fault code he'd never seen before. Normally, he'd call my cell, I'd talk him through a diagnostic, and it would be fixed in 20 minutes. This time, I didn't answer. I was at home, having dinner with my wife for the first time on a weeknight in years. The press stayed down for 7 hours until the morning crew came in, a loss of $40,000 in production. On Friday, an email arrived from Klaus, the executive at our German client. It was in German, as his first contact always was. He was asking about a technical specification for a new product run. Normally, I'd run it through a translation program, write a reply in English, have it professionally translated to German, and send it back within the hour, along with a picture of a 1970 Chevelle I'd seen at a car show. This time, I forwarded the email to Julian, the new Chief Strategy Officer, with a note. FYI, this is our largest client. I later heard that Julian, unable to read German, simply deleted it, assuming it was spam. The chaos began to ripple. Small problems, the kind I used to smother in their cribs, grew into raging fires. A shipment of raw titanium was held up in customs because the paperwork was filed incorrectly by a junior clerk Amelia had promoted. I knew the specific tariff code by heart. She didn't. The new guy didn't. Production was paused for 2 days. Amelia and Julian were too busy with their rebranding to notice the foundations cracking. They were interviewing design firms, arguing over new logos, and drafting press releases about the new era of innovation at Precision Dynamics. They were rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The emergency I was waiting for arrived the following Tuesday. It came in the form of a curt official email from Klaus's office in Germany. Since they had received no reply to their technical query and had heard unsettling rumors about a change in management, they were placing their $16.8 million annual contract on immediate hold, pending a formal review of our operational stability. Panic erupted. A $16.8 million contract is not a rounding error. It was nearly a third of our annual revenue. The finance VP, a nervous man named Peterson, nearly had a heart attack. Amelia was forced to call an emergency executive meeting for the next morning at 9 a.m. This was the moment. David had already prepared the documents. I arrived at the office the next day wearing my best suit. It wasn't a designer label like Amelia's, but it was well made and perfectly tailored. I walked past my old office, where Julian was now installed, his feet up on my old desk, barking into a headset about leveraging brand identity. I went straight to the main conference room. David Chen was waiting for me in the lobby, his briefcase in hand. We walked in together. The mood in the room was tense. Amelia was at the head of the table, her face pale, but her expression defiant. She was trying to project control. "As you know," she began, "we've hit a minor snag with our German partners. It's a communication issue, easily resolved. I'm already in the process of sourcing new suppliers to diversify our portfolio, and..." That's when I entered. All heads turned. Amelia's face hardened. "Robert, what are you doing here? Your last day was yesterday. Security, please escort Mr. Hensley out." The same two guards stood by the door, looking even more uncomfortable than last time. "I don't think so," I said, my voice calm and carrying across the room. David and I walked to the table. He opened his briefcase and began placing a single, 2-page document in front of each executive. "What is this?" Amelia demanded, her voice rising. "This," David Chen said, his tone quiet but firm, "is the agenda for a meeting of the founding board of Precision Dynamics, called to order by its sole voting member, Robert Hensley." Amelia laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Founding board? That's ridiculous. I am the majority shareholder. I am the CEO. You have no authority here." "On the contrary," David continued smoothly, "according to the company's foundational partnership agreement, signed by you, Mr. Hensley, and the late Arthur Croft on November 15th, 2006, Section 4, Clause B specifically states that any change to executive leadership must be approved by a unanimous vote of the founding board. Furthermore, it states that any member whose position is the subject of a vote must recuse themselves. As Mr. Croft's succession was the matter at hand, he was ineligible to vote on his replacement. That left a board of one." David looked directly at me. "Mr. Hensley." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the frantic thumping of Peterson's heart from across the table. Amelia's face had gone from pale to a ghastly, waxy white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at the document in front of her as if it were a snake. "Your appointment as CEO was never ratified by this board," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "Therefore, legally, it never happened. You are not, and have never been, the chief executive officer of this company." I let that hang in the air for a moment. I looked around the table at the VPs who had averted their eyes 2 weeks ago. Now, they were staring at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. "This can't be right," Amelia finally stammered, looking wildly around the room for support. "My father, he would have told me." "Your father was a brilliant man," I said, and I meant it. He put that clause in to protect his life's work from outsiders. He just never imagined the outsider would be his own daughter. I tapped the agenda in front of me. The board is now in session. The first item on the agenda is a vote to nullify the illegal termination of my employment. I looked around the table. As the sole voting member, I vote aye. The motion carries. I looked at Amelia. The second item is a vote to formally reject the unauthorized appointment of Amelia Croft to the position of CEO. I vote aye. The motion carries. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice cracking. The corporate veneer had shattered, revealing the panicked child underneath. "I already have," I said. "The third item is a vote to appoint an interim CEO, effective immediately, to stabilize operations and repair our client relationships. I nominate Marcus Thorne." Marcus was a semi-retired industry veteran, a man of unimpeachable integrity whom I'd known for 20 years. I vote aye. The motion carries. David has his signed acceptance letter right here. David slid another paper across the table. "As for you, Amelia," I continued, my voice cold now, "you are a majority shareholder. You will receive your dividends like any other shareholder, but you will have no operational role in this company. You will not have an office. You will not have a title. You will not speak for Precision Dynamics in any capacity. Your company email will be deactivated in 5 minutes. Security will now escort you from the building. This time, for good." She just stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and hatred. The two guards, finally clear on their instructions, stepped forward. She didn't resist. She was utterly broken. As they led her out, she was muttering, "It was my company. It was mine." The aftermath was swift and decisive. Marcus Thorne arrived within the hour. He was 65, calm, and knew the manufacturing business inside and out. His first act was to call Klaus in Germany personally. He explained the situation with frank honesty, a temporary and now resolved leadership crisis. He put me on the phone. I spent an hour talking to Klaus about the new engine I was rebuilding for my Mustang. By the end of the call, the $16.8 million contract was back on. Amelia's fate was grim. She was a laughingstock, the story of the Wharton MBA, who was fired by a legal document she never bothered to read, spread through the industry like wildfire. She was a pariah. She still owned 51% of the shares, but under Marcus's and my guidance, the company's bylaws were amended by the board, which now included Marcus and 2 other industry experts I trusted to ensure that no single shareholder could ever again wield such unchecked and incompetent power. Her shares gave her wealth, but no influence. Last I heard, she was living in the family's Hamptons estate, having failed to secure another executive position. Julian, the chief strategy officer, was fired within minutes of Marcus's arrival. He was last seen updating his LinkedIn profile to highlight his 2 weeks of disruptive leadership. The Bainbridge consulting contract was terminated, saving the company $1.2 million. The other VPs, the ones who had sat in silence, were dealt with quietly over the next 6 months. Marcus and I assessed them one by one. The finance VP, Peterson, was actually competent, just spineless. He stayed, but on a very short leash. The VPs of marketing and sales, who had been Amelia's biggest cheerleaders, were offered generous severance packages to pursue other opportunities. We replaced them with people who understood that a company's brand is built on the quality of its products, not the cleverness of its slogans. I didn't take the CEO job. I didn't want it. I had done my time in the trenches. I retained my title as VP of Manufacturing, but I promoted my best floor manager, a sharp young woman named Maria, to be Director of Operations, and I delegated most of the day-to-day work to her. My role became strategic. I was the chairman of the board, the guardian of the company's soul, just as Arthur had intended. My life changed. The 80-hour weeks were over. I spent evenings with Sarah. We took vacations. I went to my son's college graduation and saw my daughter perform in her university's orchestra. I had time to work on my Mustang. The constant grinding stress that had been my companion for 2 decades was gone, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. One Saturday, I was in my garage, polishing the chrome on the Mustang's engine, when my son came in. He stood there for a moment, watching me work. "You know, Dad," he said, "I never understood why you killed yourself for that place for all those years. But I get it now. You weren't just building a company. You were building this." He gestured around at the peaceful garage, at our comfortable home, at the life my sacrifice had made possible. He was right. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had finally come home. My 34% stake, once a symbol of risk and hope, was now valued at over $25 million. But the real return on my investment wasn't the money. It was the peace. It was the vindication. Arrogance assumes the rules are for other people. Competence understands that the rules, the contracts, the fine print, they are tools. And in the right hands, they can be weapons. Amelia Croft learned that lesson the hard way. She thought power came from a title and a controlling interest. I knew that true power comes from knowledge, from patience, and from knowing exactly what you're worth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button and leave a comment letting me know what you think. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next time competence puts arrogance in its place. I'll see you in the next video.